So today we're going to talk about a hot topic, inclusion. My name is Damodar. I'm a teacher and practitioner of Pact Yoga. Inclusion, creating an environment in which all peoples, regardless of race, ethnicity, culture, gender orientation, sexual orientation, feel valued, involved, that their participation is invited and welcomed, free from discrimination, and they can expect to receive equal treatment and opportunity. Increasingly, it's being recognized that it's immoral and unproductive to create or perpetuate environments where certain groups of people feel unwelcome or discouraged from free and equal participation, discriminated against purely because of their otherness, their differences, the color of their skin, their culture, their gender orientation, sexual orientation, and so on. And in many countries now there's legislation outlawing that kind of discrimination. But while laws play a part, they don't guarantee that attitudes change. Some people are naturally more open than others, and their instinct is to be accepting of others' differences, even curious about those differences and so on. Whereas others feel quite threatened or even some kind of revulsion towards people who are part of a different group. They have some kind of characteristics which are alien to them in some ways, be it the color of their skin or their culture. Others feel an instinct to band together with people who have similar traits to themselves and may even become hostile or at least exclusive in their attitudes towards people who are different in some way. They may even feel threatened by those differences, or even more strong feelings like revulsion or fear. And as such, they might just band together with people who are like them in some way. So one might assume that we're all committed to an environment that encourages everybody, welcomes their contribution, gives them equal opportunities, makes them feel safe. This is both attitudinal settings and also policies. Question comes, how do you make someone who does feel uncomfortable around other people's difference? How do you precipitate an attitude change? How do you get them to feel a little bit more comfortable? This is where an understanding of someone's innate spiritual nature can be particularly helpful. At our core, we're spiritual beings that share a common nature. Our otherness is largely external. You know, the color of the skin, the outward dress, the culture that one belongs to. If one sees the eternal spirit soul beyond those things, then those outer coverings seem to matter less. And once we're looking beyond the outer coverings, our natural kinship, in fact, once you buy into the idea that the spirit soul is intrinsically valuable and has rights, then it doesn't stop at human beings. Right now it must be pretty rough to be an animal on the planet. They also have needs, they also desire to pursue freedom and happiness, and yet they're typically locked up, or their freedoms are impinged upon in some ways. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 18, there's a really interesting verse. Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihastini Sunichaiva Sapakicha Pandita Samadarshana, which suggests that a person of knowledge is naturally gentle and regards and treats others differently, including those of other species. So why should inclusion even simply stop at human beings and not be extended to all sentient beings? Idea of understanding the soul beyond the outer coverings is a critical mentality in developing a truly loving and welcoming and inviting and respectful way of relating to others. Yeah, so a question might be asked, how reasonable is it to expect that people in the workplace can just be free from bias, that they won't hear an idea maybe coming from someone very different than them and screen it out and judge it to be of less value, or that there's a set of attitudes. And bias is a really difficult factor to overcome because it's mostly unconscious. I don't realize that my own identification with belonging to a particular class of people means that I take that to be normal and everything either side of it to be abnormal. I mean, the very fact that bias is now being discussed hopefully makes people that little bit more mindful. And I think if we're really paying attention to each other, we'll notice when someone feels excluded or that our attitude is hurtful to them in some way. We also can create an environment where we invite people to challenge us if they feel that our attitude has somehow excluded them. So a question might be asked, a lot of organizations have diversity and inclusion training and training about things like unconscious bias. Do we have any advice for them? Trying to enforce enlightened attitudes towards other people through sort of political correctness and legislation and so on, I guess it plays a part, but often it even breeds resentment. So I'd say unless there is that sense of a spiritual component where we understand someone's intrinsic worth beyond the term is used in the Vedas, upadhi, which means a designation of some sort, that I belong to this nation, I have this race, I have this culture. Unless one's invited to actually explore a person's identity beyond all of those things and see them as an intrinsically valuable soul, then it's actually hard to really surmount those kind of bias. So it might be raised that with religion in particular, there is a sort of baked-in exclusion way of thinking. We're the ones who've received the correct revelation. The other people are infidels and hopelessly, misled and going to hell and so on. So these can breed some of the problem attitudes that we've spoken of. Again, a spiritual understanding would possibly recognize that the great teachers like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Krishna, are actually consistently teaching the same deep spiritual truths, that we do have a kinship with others and that we are to surrender to God and so on. They may differ only on a few practices or really specific technical points of theology. If someone's truly embracing the principles taught by those teachers, they wouldn't discriminate or condemn or behave harshly towards fellow believers in God that may simply express those beliefs through slightly different practices. So someone who's truly enlightened, as that verse I mentioned goes, vidya vinaya, as a product of actual knowledge, one becomes gentle, one becomes naturally affectionate and feels a sense of kinship with others. If whatever belief system we're buying into promotes hate and discrimination, it's hard to believe that that's something that originated with God or that God would approve of. Yeah, so this ties in with our earlier theme of spirituality being this ability to see all souls as parts and parcels of God and therefore intrinsically valuable, that God loves them. God's not picking sides as maybe the device of people using religion to further some mundane ends. God's on everybody's side, and he truly hopes that his followers will extend the same love to every other part and parcel. You don't actually have to believe in God necessarily to buy into the sense of everyone being a spiritual soul and therefore having equal opportunity and equal rights to be respected and so on. Modern societies that possibly where people are unsure about God, or they'll see religions as being historically divisive and therefore things to move past, they can still embrace this sense of everybody being a spirit soul. It's fair to say that a lot of religions deem certain differences as sinful, and therefore people without openness will tend to feel that expressing their disapproval of certain lifestyles is a fundamental requirement of their religion, as opposed to being accepting and loving. So this is one of the biggest differences between the sense of spirituality, buying into certain spiritual principles that every sentient being is a spirit soul, and religion, which may focus intensely on rules, rules to be followed and judgments to be issued where those rules haven't been followed. And spirituality can make its way into the workplace, as opposed to, it being very inappropriate perhaps to try and convert people to other religions. Seeing others as inherently valuable souls that are trying their best to contribute to society and, feed their families and so on, one can absolutely foster an environment where everyone feels included, everyone feels valued, everyone feels like their participation matters, that they have equal opportunities. Arguably, it's our moral responsibility to create that kind of a world. Anything which impedes that has to be carefully examined as to, what wholesome principles are being contended. In reality, it's only on the spiritual platform that true equality can be experienced. So we might artificially try to foster equality in the world, and it's not that we shouldn't attempt to give everyone equal opportunity, but there'll never be equality of outcomes. People are different in so many ways, and to pretend otherwise or try and force it otherwise is typically going to fail. Whereas when we can identify of the intrinsic value of every soul, then everyone's right to be loved, to be valued, to be heard, to have an opportunity to contribute and so on, that becomes the only sane conclusion. In order to really master the spiritual science, then it's really important to immerse oneself in the right kind of literature. I mentioned earlier Bhagavad Gita. I particularly recommend Bhagavad Gita as it is, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as a place that you can fully build this spiritual understanding and therefore become naturally loving and accepting of all one's other brothers and sisters throughout creation.